They said the billionaire drowned in a storm. But when a janitor found his final security tape 11 years later, everything changed. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Because by the time this story ends, you might never look at ordinary people the same way again. But before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video. I believe this story found you today for a reason. Now let's get back to the story. The Versailles mansion had always felt like a museum of ghosts, 40,000 square feet of silence and secrets. Once home to John Eden, Florida's most admired billionaire, it now stood abandoned on the edge of Lake Butler, its marble floors still shining under the dim hallway lights. At 2 a.m., only one person was inside, Beauty Meek, the night janitor. Her playlist hummed through cheap earbuds, a country song about second chances. She mopped in rhythm, counting the minutes until the bus back to Kissimmee. But tonight, something interrupted her routine. Her mop struck metal. A vent cover popped loose, clattering to the floor. Inside the vent, a dust-covered flash drive. Beauty frowned, picked it up, and turned it over in her palm. The tag on it read, Doc, 2:37 a.m. She didn't know it yet, but she was holding the piece of evidence that would change everything Florida thought it knew about the Eden family. Curiosity, or maybe fate, made her plug it into an old office computer in the maintenance room. The screen flickered, static crackled, and there he was, John Eden, alive, bleeding, arguing with someone in the dark by the dock. The timestamp read May 19th, the night he died. Beauty's breath caught. Then the footage cut to black. Her heart hammered in her chest. And that's when she realized this billionaire hadn't drowned. He'd been erased. The mop slipped from her hand, water spreading across the tile. She stared at the screen, frozen between fear and duty. For 11 years, Windermere had worshipped a lie. And now, the only woman who could expose it was the one no one ever noticed. That night in 2015, when the storm hit Lake Butler, the world thought it lost a billionaire. Television anchors filled the airwaves with trembling voices and breaking news banners. Search for billionaire John Eden suspended after violent storm. Helicopters hovered over black waters, their searchlights cutting through sheets of rain. Reporters stood in ponchos on Windermere's flooded streets, shouting above the wind about the tragedy that shook Florida's elite. The camera flashes from that week still lingered in public memory. Scott and Mary Eden standing before the gates of Versailles Mansion, their designer coats soaked in grief. Beside them, John's lifelong friends, Elijah, Sam, and Rice, bowed their heads like pallbearers rehearsing a tragedy. Their tears were quoted. Their sorrow was televised. Within 48 hours, the case was declared an accident. The storm had taken him, they said. Lake Butler had swallowed both his body and his secrets. The world moved on, grateful for an easy explanation. But explanations can rot with time. Now, 11 years later, Beauty Meek sat in the dim maintenance office, her eyes locked on the paused video screen. Her hands trembled around the mouse. The image of John's bloodied face haunted her, his desperate voice echoing, "You don't have to do this." She replayed it again and again, watching the figure in the shadows, taller, familiar, angry. "Who were you?" she whispered. The night swallowed the sound of her voice. Sleep never came. Instead, she scrolled through every archived article about John Eden, every photo, every headline. And with each click, the story unraveled further. Dates didn't line up. Witness names had vanished. Even the original police report was gone. For the first time in her life, Beauty Meek, a janitor, a mother, a woman no one noticed, realized she might be the only person left willing to ask what really happened that night. By morning, Beauty's nerves were raw. The mansion's walls seemed to whisper with what she'd seen. She couldn't keep it to herself, not yet. There was one person she trusted more than anyone. Her aunt, Carla Meek, a retired nurse who lived in a modest duplex near Lake Eola Park in Orlando. Carla answered the door in her robe, her gray curls still damp from a shower. "Beauty, it's 7 in the morning," she said, smiling until she noticed her niece's trembling hands. "What happened?" Beauty didn't speak. She simply set the flash drive on the table. "I need you to see this." Minutes later, the old computer hummed, the screen flickering to life. The video played John Eden's face, pale and panicked, pleading into the storm. Carla's breath hitched. She leaned closer, one hand pressed against her mouth. "I treated that man," she whispered. Beauty froze. "What?" That night, the storm. A John Doe came into the clinic near the park. Hypothermia, head trauma. I stitched his temple myself. Carla's voice shook. He vanished before dawn. No name, no discharge papers. I thought he'd died somewhere else. The words hung in the air like a secret resurrected. Beauty opened another file on the drive, corrupted, audio only. Static filled the room. Then voices emerged, low and arguing. Scott, Mary, Elijah, Sam, Rice. The sentence that followed made Beauty's pulse stop. "If he disappears tonight, none of this will trace back to us." Her stomach dropped. The men the world had praised for their loyalty were planning something darker. She looked at Carla. "Do I take this to the police?" Carla hesitated. "You really think they'll go after people like the Edens?" The room fell silent except for the hum of the old fan. Have you ever found something that made you question everything? If your truth could destroy the powerful but cost your peace, would you still speak? Maybe that's the moment you realize stories like this deserve to live on. Don't just watch. Stay with Beauty. Let her courage remind you why truth matters. The next afternoon, Beauty sat in her old Corolla, the Florida sun beating through the windshield as she reread the name scrawled on a sticky note. Arthur Garner, retired attorney, last known to work with Eden Global's estate division. If anyone knew why John Eden's fortune had vanished after his death, it would be him. Garner's home was tucked behind overgrown palms in an aging Winter Park neighborhood. The house smelled faintly of dust and old books. When he opened the door, he looked startled, a thin man in his 70s with sharp eyes that had seen too many secrets. "You said this is about John Eden?" he asked, motioning her inside. Beauty nodded and set the flash drive on the table between them. "I think he's alive," she said quietly, "and I think his death wasn't what it seemed." Garner's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "I handled his estate back in 2015. There was something odd in his final paperwork. A foundation, the Eden Hope Trust. He planned to transfer everything there after his birthday, but when the accident happened, the foundation disappeared overnight, gone from the registry, no trace." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your discovery could ruin powerful people, Beauty. And if you're right, someone already died to keep this buried." The words chilled her. She could almost feel John Eden's ghost standing between them, not haunting, but warning. As dusk fell, Beauty thanked him and hurried back toward the Versailles mansion to finish her shift. The air was heavy, the kind that carried storms even when the sky was clear. When she reached the gates, she froze. A black SUV sat parked across the street, engine idling, windows tinted dark. Its headlights flickered, once deliberate, watching. Beauty's heart thudded as she fumbled for her keys. She looked back, but the SUV was gone. Only silence remained, and the sharp, undeniable feeling that she wasn't alone anymore. The morning air over Windermere felt different, charged, restless, almost electric. Beauty hadn't planned to tell anyone about the footage, but fear has a way of turning into courage when silence starts to suffocate you. She reached out to Alicia Raymond, a seasoned investigative reporter known for chasing stories most people avoided. They met at a quiet diner off Route 535. Alicia listened without interrupting, her pen frozen above the notepad. When Beauty showed her the flash drive, the reporter's eyes widened. "If this is real," she said softly, "Florida's richest family built their empire on a lie." 2 days later, Beauty's world exploded. Headlines flooded every screen. Billionaire's death reopened after janitor discovers hidden footage. By sunrise, media vans lined the streets near Versailles Mansion. Reporters shouted her name. Drones hovered above the estate gates. Neighbors who once ignored her now whispered every time she passed. Beauty Meek, the invisible janitor, was suddenly the woman everyone wanted to see or silence. At first, the threats were subtle. A voicemail from an unknown number. "You don't know what you're starting." Then her mailbox was burned to ash, her tires slashed in the night. The final message came as a text that made her blood run cold. "Stop digging, or we'll finish what the lake couldn't." Her hands shook as she locked her apartment door and pulled her daughter close. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about John Eden's truth, it was about surviving it. If you're still here, maybe you understand what it means to stand alone against the powerful. Beauty doesn't have followers, she has faith, and faith needs witnesses. Stay not for the story, but for the truth that someone risked everything to tell. The text came just after midnight. "If you want the truth, meet at the dock where it started." Beauty stared at her phone, pulse pounding. Every rational thought told her to ignore it. Every motherly instinct screamed to stay home. But curiosity, that dangerous spark of courage she couldn't smother anymore, pushed her out the door. Rain swept across Lake Butler as she pulled up to the old dock behind Versailles Mansion. The air smelled of pine and electricity, the kind of scent that always came before a storm. The lake shimmered beneath flashes of lightning, beautiful and cruelly familiar. A man stood at the edge of the dock, his shoulders slumped beneath a soaked jacket. Elijah, older now, his face worn with guilt instead of age. "I knew someone would come," he said, his voice breaking against the wind. "I didn't want it to end like this." Beauty took a cautious step forward. "End like what?" Elijah's eyes met hers, hollow, tired. "John found out about the money, the offshore accounts. We thought we could scare him, force him to back off. But that night, he swallowed hard. Scott lost control. They argued by the boat. John hit his head when he fell. We panicked. The storm covered everything." Beauty felt the world tilt. Elijah shook his head violently. "We thought he was dead. I swear we did. Until your video. Until I saw him alive." Thunder cracked, and for a heartbeat, the entire lake lit up. Beauty turned toward the sound of tires on gravel. Headlights pierced the darkness, a black SUV, approaching fast. Elijah's face drained of color. "You shouldn't have come alone," he whispered. Lightning flashed again, and the shadow inside the car stepped out, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. The SUV door swung open, and for a moment the rain swallowed everything: sound, breath, reason. A tall figure stepped out, moving with a limp that spoke of old wounds. The headlights cut through the storm just long enough for Beauty to see the scar slicing across his temple. Elijah stumbled back, voice shaking. "No, it can't be." But Beauty already knew. The man in the storm was John Eden, the billionaire Florida had buried 11 years ago. He walked closer, each step deliberate, the rain streaking down a face hardened by years of hiding. "You found it," he said quietly, his voice low and rough. "You did what no one else could." Beauty's throat tightened. "They said you drowned." "I almost did," John replied, eyes flicking toward Elijah. "They left me there, bleeding, half-conscious. The storm pulled me under, but it didn't finish the job. Someone dragged me out near Lake Eola, a nurse. I stayed alive, but the man I was—" He paused, his gaze distant. John Eden had to die for Jonathan Dean to live. Elijah trembled, his words tripping over guilt. "We thought you were gone." "Scott," he panicked. John's jaw clenched, fury flashing before giving way to something heavier. "You didn't think. You covered your greed with lies and left me to rot." The wind roared, thunder cracking above them as if the heavens themselves demanded a reckoning. John turned back to Beauty. "I've watched them twist everything I built into something rotten. My company, my name. But now I have proof, and you, Beauty, gave me reason to use it." Lightning illuminated the three of them on the dock. The man who vanished, the friend who betrayed him, and the janitor who uncovered it all. Behind them, the storm gathered strength, ready to wash away what was left of their lies. By dawn, the sky above Windermere glowed gray, heavy with rain and reckoning. The silence that had once wrapped Versailles Mansion was shattered by the roar of engines and the sharp commands of federal agents. Flashing lights painted the marble facade red and blue. The empire John Eden built and his own blood had stolen was finally collapsing. Inside the gates, Scott and Mary were led out in handcuffs, faces pale against the glare of cameras. Elijah, Sam, and Rice followed, heads bowed, their expensive suits soaked from the storm. What had begun as wealth ended as spectacle. Reporters shouted their names, but none of them spoke. The footage streamed live across the country, the fall of the Eden Empire. Viewers watched from diners, airports, and living rooms, unable to look away. The story of Florida's most powerful family had become a public confession. Outside the gates, beneath a canopy of umbrellas, John Eden stood beside Beauty Meek. The man the world thought dead faced the cameras for the first time in 11 years. His voice trembled, not with fear but with gratitude. "They tried to erase me," he said, glancing at Beauty. "But the woman who swept my floors brought me back." For a moment, there was silence, then an eruption of applause that drowned out the rain. Cameras flashed, microphones surged forward. Every outlet wanted the same headline: "The janitor who exposed the truth." Beauty didn't speak. She simply nodded, the corners of her mouth curving in a quiet, almost disbelieving smile. Her hands, rough from years of work, were steady now. Somewhere in Kissimmee, her daughter watched from their worn couch, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. The pride in her eyes said everything Beauty couldn't. The storm had finally broken, and for the first time, light touched the mansion without shame. Months passed, and the world moved on, at least the part that could. But in Windermere, the Versailles Mansion, was reborn. No longer a shrine to privilege, it now carried a quieter kind of power. The Eden Foundation for Truth and Workers' Rights, funded by John Eden himself. The gates that once kept people out now welcomed them in. Inside, the marble gleamed again. The chandeliers sparkled, not for parties, but for purpose. And walking down the long corridor of the East Wing was Beauty Meek, her steps echoing softly against the tile she'd once cleaned in silence. She stopped where it had all begun. The vent that once hid the flash drive was sealed, now polished, perfect. Still, she knelt, pressing her hand to the floor as if it could still whisper secrets. Her voice broke the hush. They thought I was invisible. But sometimes the ones no one sees see everything. The words hung in the air like prayer. From behind her came the slow, steady sound of footsteps. John Eden stood in the doorway, older now, his scar faint in the golden light. Peace had finally softened his face. "You still come back here," he said gently. Beauty smiled without looking up. Some floors deserve to be remembered. Together, they stepped toward the tall windows overlooking Lake Butler, the same waters that had once held so many lies. The sunset painted the sky in amber and rose, washing the mansion in warmth. If this story touched you, stay not for numbers, but for the people who still believe truth is worth cleaning for. Every person you overlook might be the one who changes everything. As the light faded, Beauty whispered to the lake, "You can bury truth for a decade, but it still finds a way to breathe." And for the first time, the mansion finally felt clean. If you loved this story, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a like and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and which part of the story hit you the hardest. We've got more powerful, emotional stories coming your way, and trust me, you don't want to miss them.